Sarah George had always hated poverty. Growing up in the cramped corners of a one-room apartment in Ajagunal, she would stare at the Lekki skyline with fire in her eyes. She wanted more than the dusty fan that barely turned, more than the mamaput she and her mother shared. Her mother, Gladys George, often reminded her, "If you marry well, you live well." And for Sarah that was gospel. She was beauty, brains, and boldness wrapped in one, and she wasn't going to waste it on an ordinary life. Her boyfriend, Tony Daniels, was loyal but broke. He sold second-hand phones in Computer Village and always spoke of tomorrow. But Sarah wanted today. One Friday night, Sarah followed her friend Tina Marshall to a high-end lounge in Victoria Island. It was there she met Mr. Edward Okoye, a man whose suit alone could feed 10 families. He had a quiet presence, silver in his beard and wealth in his silence. When he spoke, his voice was deep, calm, and commanding. "May I buy you ladies a drink?" he asked. Sarah didn't hesitate. "They talk." She laughed. He listened. Before the night ended, he offered her a ride in a black Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon. Gladys watched from the window as her daughter stepped out of the car later that night. She pulled Sarah inside and whispered with trembling joy, "That man! He could change our lives." And just like that, Sarah made a silent vow she would make him hers, whatever it took. 2 weeks passed, and Sarah was already tasting a new life. Edward Okoye began sending weekly gifts, designer handbags, crisp bundles of cash, and food hampers too heavy for one person to carry. He never asked for anything in return, just her time, her attention, and her smile. Sarah played the perfect young damsel, soft-spoken, curious, respectful. She even lied about her age, shaving off 4 years to seem more ripe for marriage. Gladys encouraged her from the background, whispering prayers she hadn't prayed since her church days. "God has remembered us," she kept saying. Meanwhile, Tony Daniels tried to reach her. Calls unanswered, messages left unread. She blocked him after his final text. "You've changed, Sarah." One Sunday, Edward invited Sarah to his mansion in Banana Island. It was more palace than home. Marble floors, chandeliers like galaxies, and walls whispering wealth. He cooked for her, grilled prawns with jollof rice, and she pretended to be surprised, even though she Googled the recipe earlier that morning. After dinner, Edward leaned forward and said, "Sarah, I'm not looking for games. I want a wife. I want peace. And I want you." Sarah's breath caught. This was it. The ultimate jackpot. She giggled, feigned shyness, then said, "You're serious?" He nodded slowly. "I lost my family years ago. I've been alone too long. You feel safe." Those words made something flicker in Sarah's chest, but she buried it beneath thoughts of diamonds and passport stamps. She told her mother that night, and Gladys wept, not out of joy but something deeper. But she quickly wiped her tears and said, "Say yes, before he changes his mind." Edward Okoye didn't wait long. The following weekend, he proposed in the most Lagos way possible. Private yacht on the lagoon, violinist playing Ace's Bibank, and a diamond ring that could blind the sun. Sarah said yes before he even finished asking. Photos flooded Instagram. Friends screamed in comments, "God, when? Soft life. Nah, this kind breakfast I want." But Gladys George watched the proposal video in silence. Her hands trembled slightly, and when Sarah asked what was wrong, she smiled too quickly. "Old age," she muttered. That night, after Sarah went to bed, Gladys opened an old box under her bed. A dusty envelope, a torn photograph, and a name scribbled in red ink, Edward. Wedding planning began in full speed. The venue, the dress, the Oso Abbey colors. Lagos society buzzed with the news of the mysterious young lady marrying one of the city's most private billionaires. But one afternoon, as Sarah got her nails done in Lekki Phase 1, her ex-boyfriend Tony showed up. He looked tired, but his eyes held fire. "Sarah, listen to me. Something is off," he said. She rolled her eyes. "You're just bitter." He shook his head. "That man. I did some digging. Edward Okoye disappeared from the public for over 20 years. Nobody knows what happened. That's not normal." Sarah brushed him off like dust, but as he walked away, doubt crept in. Later that night, she told her mother about the encounter, hoping for comfort. But instead, Gladys froze, eyes wide, voice shaking. What exactly did he say? Gladys George couldn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed, wringing her hands as rain tapped on the tin roof like a ticking clock. Tony's words played over and over in her mind. Edward disappeared for 20 years. She remembered those years too clearly. Edward Okoye was her past, the man who vanished after their wild affair back in university. She had been young, naive, and in love. But when she told him she was pregnant, he vanished without a word. Sarah never knew her father. And Gladys never told her. Until now, she never thought she'd have to. But fate had a cruel way of pulling old secrets out of hiding. Meanwhile, Sarah was too busy living her best life to notice her mother's distress. She was wedding shopping in Ikeja Mall, taking selfies, laughing with Tina. Edward sent her daily voice notes, each one laced with affection. "You make me feel young again, Sarah. I never thought I'd love like this." She blushed every time, but deep down a strange unease brewed. Why didn't he ever talk about his past? No children, no family, just silence. That night, Gladys called Sarah into her room. "Sit down," she said, voice low. "I need to tell you something important about Edward." Sarah laughed nervously. "What? Don't tell me you dated him too." Gladys didn't smile. Her voice broke. "Sarah, there's a reason that man feels familiar. I think he might be your father." The words struck like thunder. Sarah's eyes widened. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Sarah stood frozen, her mother's words ringing in her ears like an echo in a cave. "Your father," she whispered, blinking as if the truth would vanish with her tears. "Mummy, that's not funny." But Gladys didn't blink. Her face was pale, haunted. "His name was Edward. Edward Okoye. I met him when I was your age. He left before I gave birth." Sarah staggered backward, knocking over a plastic chair. "No, no, this is madness," she said, shaking her head. "You must be confused. He's a billionaire. Why would he leave his own blood?" Gladys' voice cracked. "Because he was scared and selfish. And I was too ashamed to track him down." Sarah refused to believe it. "It can't be him. There are many Edward Okoyes in Lagos." Gladys walked over to her old wooden chest and pulled out a faded picture, a young man standing with his arm around a smiling Gladys. Sarah gasped. It was him. A younger version, but unmistakably Edward. Same jawline, same eyes. Her chest tightened as her world unraveled. "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice trembling. Gladys gripped her hand. "You must end it. Quietly. Before this goes too far. He must never know." But Sarah's mind was racing. End the relationship. Cancel the luxury wedding. Give up the millions. She looked down at her engagement ring. Once a dream, now a curse. "No," she said quietly. "I need time. I need to think." But in her heart, greed still wrestled with truth, and greed wasn't ready to lose. The next morning, Sarah put on a brave face and walked into a bridal fitting in Victoria Island like nothing had happened. The designer draped her in imported silk, while champagne glasses clinked in celebration of the most anticipated wedding of the year. But inside she was spiraling. Her mother's words haunted her, and every time Edward called her "my princess," it sent chills down her spine. She wanted to tell him. She wanted to run. But instead, she smiled for the cameras, hugged her bridesmaids, and pretended her world wasn't built on a lie. Later that evening, she met up with Tony Daniels in a quiet bar in Surrey. "You were right," she whispered, avoiding his eyes. "He might actually be my father." Tony froze. "Wait, what?" She nodded, tears gathering. "My mum confirmed it. She showed me pictures. It's him." Tony exhaled slowly, the weight of the situation settling between them like thick fog. "Sarah, you can't go through with this. This is dangerous. Emotionally, mentally, even legally." Sarah looked away. "It's not that simple. What if it's a mistake? What if my mum's just scared?" Tony leaned closer. "And what if she's not? What if this wedding ends your life as you know it?" Sarah stood up. "I need proof. Real proof. Until then, the wedding is still on." And with that, she walked into the night, dressed like a bride, thinking like a detective, and trapped like a daughter. Sarah knew she couldn't go on with blind guesses. The wedding was 3 weeks away, and tabloids had already started referring to her as the future Mrs. Okoye. She needed answers, fast and private. She called Tony. "Help me get a DNA test," she said. He paused. "Do you have anything with his DNA?" Sarah's voice dropped. "His toothbrush. I can get it from the guest bathroom." That night, while Edward was on a business call, she slipped into his suite, grabbed the blue-bristled toothbrush, and tucked it into her handbag. Her hands were trembling, not from fear, but from shame. 2 days later, Tony handed her a brown envelope with no return address. "It's done. The results will be ready in 48 hours, he said. Sarah nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, she sat on her bed staring at her vision board. The dream house, the luxury car, the Maldives honeymoon. Everything she ever wanted was tied to a man who might be her father. Meanwhile, Edward texted her a picture of a necklace he bought from Dubai. "For my bride. You deserve the world." Sarah held the phone against her chest and burst into tears. Was she in love? Or just in too deep? And if the test confirmed it, how would she even survive the fallout? The envelope felt heavier than it should. Sarah stared at it in Tony's car, parked under a mango tree on a quiet street in Yaba. The sun was high, but her hands were cold. "Are you ready?" Tony asked. She nodded slowly. He opened the flap and carefully pulled out the results. Silence. His eyes scanned the paper, then froze. "Sarah," he said softly. "It's true. He's your biological father." Her entire world tilted. It felt like the road, the sky, her lungs, all collapsed into silence. "No," she whispered. "It can't be, it can't." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she clutched her chest. "I was going to marry him, kissed him. I let him." Tony reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Don't touch me. Don't look at me," she screamed. People walking past stared, but Tony quickly pulled the window up. "You have to end it now, Sarah," he said gently. "The wedding, the lies, all of it." Sarah looked out the window, her reflection blurry with tears. "How do I tell a billionaire that I'm his daughter and almost became his wife?" Her voice cracked. "Do I ruin him or ruin myself?" Tony said nothing. Because some secrets were bombs, and whoever lit the match would be destroyed. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat in her apartment in Lekki, wrapped in a blanket, watching the city lights flicker like taunts from fate. By morning she had made a decision. She was going to confront her mother, alone. She took a bold taxi to Aja and barged into her mother's salon, ignoring the startled customers. "You lied to me my whole life," Sarah hissed, her voice trembling. Gladys froze, then dismissed the staff. "I did it to protect you," she said. "I was young. Edward used me. He disappeared before I even knew I was pregnant. But Sarah wasn't having it. And now you were going to let me marry him." Gladys broke down. "I tried to stop it, Sarah. I sent letters. I showed up uninvited. I begged you." Sarah's eyes burned. "No, you dropped a bomb and disappeared. You left me to find out from a DNA test." Gladys grabbed her shoulders. "You were too far gone. I thought if you saw the life you wanted crashing, you'd stop yourself." Sarah pulled away. "Well, I didn't. I fell in love with the man who gave me life. And now I have to kill a wedding and bury a secret, one that should have never existed." As Sarah stormed out, Gladys called after her. "Don't make this worse, Sarah. Don't tell him. Some truths destroy too many lives." Sarah didn't answer. But in her silence, war had already begun. Sarah arrived at Edward's Ikoyi mansion wearing the same red dress he loved. Her makeup was perfect, her smile forced, and her hands shaking underneath the tablecloth. Edward beamed across the dinner table. "The press wants to cover our wedding exclusively," he said, sipping wine. "They say we're Lagos golden couple." Sarah forced a laugh. "We are golden, just with cracks no one sees." Edward chuckled, misreading her tone. "You're nervous. That's natural." But Sarah's stomach churned. Each bite of food felt like betrayal. She stared at him, this powerful, kind-hearted man. The man who was also her biological father. Midway through dinner, she dropped her fork. "Edward, have you ever loved someone so much it scared you?" He smiled warmly. "Every day since I met you." Her eyes filled with tears. "What if love becomes a sin the moment it begins?" Edward raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" Sarah paused, her voice shaky. "If I told you something dark, would you still love me?" He reached across the table and took her hand. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Sarah wanted to scream, to confess, to run. But all she did was smile, tears glistening. "I hope so. I really hope so." Because she knew, soon the truth would crush them both. Back at her apartment, Sarah sat by the window with a pen in her hand and tears on her chin. She had written and torn up 5 versions of a letter, each one trying to tell Edward the truth without killing him. But how do you tell a man he's not your fiancé? He's your father. Tony knocked lightly and stepped in. "Still haven't told him." She shook her head. "How do I even begin, Tony?" "Hey, Daddy. I almost married you." Tony sighed. "This isn't a Nollywood film, Sarah. You can't run from the climax. You either say it or lose your mind pretending." Sarah picked up the latest version of the letter. "Maybe I'll just leave this in his office, then disappear." Tony shook his head. "Coward's route. You owe him the truth to his face." She clenched her jaw. "You think I want to hurt him? He saved my life. Loved me. Gave me the world." She threw the letter into the bin and stood up. "Maybe he'll hate me. Maybe he'll collapse. But if this wedding happens, I'll never forgive myself." Tony placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then do it, Sarah. Before someone else finds out and ruins both your lives." She nodded slowly, heart thundering. because the storm she feared was already brewing, and delaying it only made the crash louder. Edward sat in his lush home office, flipping through wedding files when the gate intercom buzzed. "There's a woman here to see you, sir. Says it's urgent. Her name is Gladys George." Edward's brows furrowed. "Send her in." A few minutes later, Gladys entered in a simple gown, her eyes carrying both fear and fire. "We need to talk, Edward." He stood confused. "Sarah's mother." She nodded. "Yes. And once your mistake." Edward's face changed. "Excuse me." Gladys wasted no time. "Sarah is your daughter. I was 17. You left. You never knew. But I raised her, and she's about to marry you." Edward stumbled back into his chair, heart racing. "No, that's not possible. Sarah can't be your child," Gladys interrupted, voice trembling. "But she is. I came to stop this before it becomes your destruction." He stared at her, speechless. Every moment he had spent loving Sarah, suddenly twisted, poisoned. "Why didn't you come to me earlier?" Gladys wiped her tears. "Because you were untouchable, powerful, and Sarah was already in too deep. Tried. I really did." Edward looked away, his world spinning. "Does Sarah know?" Gladys nodded. "She found out. She's been trying to find the courage to tell you." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock counting down to a shattered future. Sarah arrived at Edward's house with trembling hands and a heart wrapped in dread. She had rehearsed her confession all night, preparing to let go of the fairy tale and face the horror. But when she stepped inside, the air was thick, too thick. The maid avoided her gaze, and the living room was dead silent. "Where's Edward?" she asked. "In his study," the maid replied quietly. Sarah rushed in, only to find him seated like a man who had stared death in the face. His eyes were red, glassy, and hollow. "You knew," he said without looking at her. "All this time, you knew." She froze. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. "She told me," Edward continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Gladys came, said I was your father, and that you found out." Sarah sank to her knees. "I was going to tell you, but you didn't," he snapped, finally looking at her. His eyes were soaked with betrayal. "You let me love you like that. Plan a wedding. Tell the world. How could you?" She crawled closer. "I didn't mean to fall for you. I didn't know at first. And when I found out, I tried." "You should have run," he said bitterly. "Instead you stayed. For the money. For comfort." His voice cracked. "You broke me, Sarah." And just like that, the man who once promised her the world now looked like a man who had lost everything, including himself. Edward didn't come out of his study for 2 days. The house remained silent, the staff dismissed, and all calls ignored. Sarah stayed in the guest room, sleepless, devastated, questioning her own soul. On the 3rd morning, Edward finally emerged, unshaven, eyes sunken, and holding a dusty brown envelope. "I had to be sure," he said quietly, handing it to her. Inside were DNA test results, confirming everything. "It's real," he muttered. "All of it." Sarah clutched the papers, her hands shaking. "I never meant to hurt you." But Edward raised his hand. "There's something you don't know. I've been hiding something too." Sarah stared, puzzled. Edward took a deep breath. "Years ago, I lost a daughter. Gladys told me she miscarried. I believed her. I buried that part of my life. But I always had this haunting emptiness. The moment I met you, I felt something different. Familiar." He looked at her with guilt. "I should have seen it. I should have known. Sarah's lips parted in disbelief. You thought I reminded you of her? Edward nodded slowly. But I buried the thought. I was too focused on love. On escaping loneliness. The truth was now a pile of ash. Everything burned, exposed. And Sarah, once blinded by wealth, now stood neck-deep in a tragedy far worse than poverty. Sarah left Edward's mansion that night, her mind spinning in a storm of shame, confusion, and grief. She went straight to her mother's flat in Surreyshire and banged on the door like a woman possessed. Gladys opened it, startled. "You lied to me," Sarah whispered. "You told me he didn't want me, that he abandoned you. You let me date him, marry him." Gladys sighed heavily, lowering herself onto the worn-out sofa. "I was protecting you," she said, but her voice shook. "From what?" Sarah yelled. "From love. From my own father." Her scream echoed through the small flat, drowning out the fan buzzing above them. Gladys wiped her face, her hands trembling. "He didn't abandon us, Sarah. Ran. I was young. He was rich. I thought he'd choose his reputation over me and the baby. So I left. Changed my name. I raised you alone." Sarah fell into a chair, her eyes wide. "So you never told him he had a daughter?" Gladys looked down. "No. And when I saw you two, I thought I could stop it before it got far. But I was too late." Sarah felt like the walls were closing in. Everything was false, her love, her identity, her mother's protection. "You didn't just ruin my life, Mum," she said slowly. "You buried it alive." And with that she walked out of her mother's house, out of her past, and into a future built on ashes. News spread like wildfire. It started with a leak, an anonymous blog post, likely from a staff member or wedding vendor. Young bride calls off wedding after DNA results reveal groom is her biological father. By noon, gossip sites had picked it up. By evening, Edward's company stock had dipped, and Sarah's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Strangers flooded her DMs, asking for the full gist. TikTokers reenacted scenes they imagined. It was no longer just her tragedy. It had become public entertainment. Sarah locked herself in a short-let apartment in Lekki, deleting all apps, but the shame was inescapable. Edward too faced backlash. His board demanded answers. Sponsors pulled out. And though he tried to protect Sarah by taking the blame publicly, calling it a mistake born of lost years and hidden truths, the world was cruel. Memes flew. Headlines twisted the story into scandalous fiction. Gladys was painted as the villain by some, but Sarah knew better. Everyone had blood on their hands. Then came the knock. Tony, calm, collected, carrying a bag of jollof rice and fried plantain. "Eat first," he said. "We'll fix the rest later." And for the first time in weeks, Sarah allowed herself to cry. Not because she was broken, but because someone still saw her as human. Tony stayed the night, sleeping on the couch like a quiet guardian. Sarah didn't ask for much, just his silence, his presence. In the morning he brewed tea, sat on the edge of her bed and said, "I know you feel like life is laughing at you. But you're not a punchline, Sarah. You're a survivor." She stared at him, eyes tired. "I married my father, Tony. Even if we didn't. You know. It's still disgusting." He nodded slowly. "But you didn't know. That's not your sin. That's theirs, for hiding the truth. You've suffered enough." She looked away, unsure if forgiveness or love was still something she could carry. Meanwhile, Edward sat alone in his mansion, having stepped down from the board. The once proud business tycoon now looked like a man mourning a lifetime of decisions. He wrote a letter addressed to Sarah, confessing everything, How he'd tried to track Gladys years ago but was told she died in a fire. How he never stopped feeling like a part of him was missing. How meeting Sarah had filled that void without him realizing why. He sent the letter with a driver, asking only that she read it when she was ready. That night, as rain poured over Lagos, Sarah held the envelope, unopened, unsure if closure was a gift, or a fresh wound waiting to reopen. Sarah sat at the small table in the apartment, the envelope unopened in front of her like a live grenade. She ran her fingers across her name written in Edward's bold handwriting. After a long breath, she tore it open. Inside was a 6-page handwritten letter. His words weren't poetic. They were raw, stumbling through regret and fractured memory. He wrote of Gladys, how he'd searched for her after university, even hired a private investigator when his heart kept tugging. He wrote of seeing Sarah that first time, how something about her spirit felt familiar, how her laugh echoed someone he used to love, and how he hated himself for falling for someone he later realized was his child. Tears fell silently as she read. Edward didn't ask for forgiveness. He only asked for understanding. He wanted her to know he was broken too. Sarah folded the letter and stared out of the window at the Lagos skyline, beautiful yet chaotic, much like her life. She didn't know what healing looked like, but something about that letter unclogged the storm inside her chest. Later she called her mother. "I read his letter," she said. I think I need to see him. Not to fix anything, just to end it properly." Gladys agreed. Some doors must be shut gently with words, not slammed in rage. The house in Ikoyi looked different this time. It wasn't grand or intimidating. It felt like a tired man's fortress. Sarah stepped out of the car slowly, her palms damp with nerves. Edward opened the door himself, dressed simply in a brown kaftan, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. "You came," he said, voice shaking. Sarah nodded. "I needed to." They sat across from each other in the living room. No butlers, no distractions, just silence and two people wrecked by fate. Edward tried to apologize again, but Sarah raised her hand. "I'm not here to blame you. I just want to understand how this happened. How no one knew." They talked for hours about his past, her childhood, the fire Gladys escaped, and how information had gotten twisted. Edward admitted he wished he'd fought harder for the truth back then. Sarah, for the first time, opened up about how being fatherless had shaped her hunger for validation and stability. "Maybe that's why I chased wealth," she said. "To feel like I mattered. To feel chosen." Edward's eyes glistened. "And I chose you. Just not in the way a father should have." Before leaving, Sarah handed him the letter back. "Keep it. I don't hate you, but I can't be in your life. Not now. Maybe not ever. But thank you for finally telling the truth." She left, the door clicking softly behind her like the closing of a chapter. 3 months later, life in Lagos had settled into a strange peace. Sarah didn't move back into the chaos of luxury or scandal. She stayed quiet, choosing to rebuild in her own way. She began volunteering at a local girls' mentorship program in Surulere, helping young women navigate choices she once made blindly. Each day felt like stitching a piece of herself back together. Her story was now her weapon and her warning. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had lost its power to paralyze. She was no longer the girl who chased comfort at the cost of truth. She was a woman who had faced it and survived. One evening, Tony found her seated by the waterfront, journal in hand. "I heard your name on the radio today," he said. "They were talking about your mentorship program. Said you're changing lives." She smiled faintly. "Maybe because mine was almost destroyed. Feels right to help others before they fall." He sat beside her, shoulder touching hers. You think you'll ever forgive them? She didn't answer immediately. I think forgiveness is like grief. It doesn't ask for permission. It just shows up one day when you're not angry anymore. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting Lagos in orange and gold. So, Tony asked quietly, what do you want next? Sarah looked out at the water. A new story. One that I get to write, with my eyes open this time. Before you go, kindly tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to know who our favorite viewers are. And as the story ends, don't just leave. Share your thoughts with us. What touched you the most? What did you learn? Your voice matters here.